All right, get ready because this deep dive is taking us into Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. And wow, this book, it really spans across time. I mean, we're
Uh-huh.
talking generations, centuries, starting way back in 18th century Ghana.
It's incredible how Gyasi manages it all.
Yeah.
The way she creates this giant, intricate story, all stemming from the lives of two half-sisters, Effie and Isi, though their lives, they go in completely different directions right from the beginning.
Yeah, that's what drew me in from the very first page. You've got Ifia, who marries a British slave trader and ends up living a pretty comfortable life, at least materially, at Cape Coast Castle. But then there's Essie, who is captured, forced into the terrible reality of the transatlantic slave trade.
And Gyasi, she doesn't shy away from that brutality. She shows us these two sisters from the same family facing completely different fates. It makes you wonder, does the novel even offer a way out, a possibility of true freedom when slavery's legacy has such a hold, even today?
It's a question that comes up again and again throughout the book. Let's take a closer look at Effia's story. She's married to James Collins, this British slave trader, living right there in Cape Coast Castle. Can you imagine? Living in the very place where people who look just like you are imprisoned, waiting for their fate.
It's such a striking image.
Yeah.
The novel even mentions that Epia, she had actually walked past the castle when she was younger with her mother, but she'd never set foot inside until her wedding day.
Like the door of no return, it becomes this looming presence at her own wedding. It's a haunting detail, speaks to how impossible her situation is. Everything about her life, her comfort, it's tied to this unimaginable suffering happening just below her.
And the novel makes sure we know she's completely aware of what's going on down in those dungeons. That knowledge, her part in it, it becomes this huge weight on her.
You see her trying to find her way in this impossible world. There's this scene where Adwoa, the woman who raised Effia, tells her to be like a lioness. And it seems that Effia really tries to follow that advice, holding tight to her position in the castle.
Right, it's as if she's building up these walls around herself, trying to find some kind of control in a system that takes away all her power. We even see her finding a strange kind of security in her marriage to James and in becoming a mother.
But even then, those horrors around her, they keep threatening to break through. Like that scene with Echo, chilling. This woman covered in snakes, she confronts Effia head-on about the slave trade. It's like nature itself is rising up in protest.
Eck is warning to Effia that their husbands, the slave traders, they need to learn to tell the difference. It's haunting. This very real reminder of how the slave trade robbed people of their humanity. And that dehumanization, it's a central part of Essie's story too, but in a tragically different way.
Absolutely. We see Essie ripped away from everything she knows. One minute she's with her family, the next she's thrown into the hold of a slave ship. Sent to a life she couldn't even fathom.
And Gyasi doesn't hold back on showing us how awful it was on those ships. The cramped space, the filth, disease everywhere. But what I find so powerful is that even in the middle of all that suffering, Essie, she refuses to give up on hope.
That really struck me too. It would have been so easy to just fall into despair. But instead, she finds a connection, a small light in her friendship with Tansy. They share stories, hold on to their humanity, even when faced with such cruelty.
It shows how powerful storytelling can be, the way it can keep us going in the darkest times. Those stories, the memories of her mother, her home, they become Isi's lifeline.
But then, just when you think things can't get any worse, there's more tragedy. It's almost too much to read about Ahua, the woman in the hold with Isi, losing her baby.
It's such a short scene, but it says so much. It just shows how little regard there was for human life within slavery. A mother's bond with her child, something sacred, it means nothing to their captors.
It makes you wonder, how could anyone ever come back from that kind of trauma, that level of violation?
And that's just the very beginning. This is where we start to see how the novel deals with generations. The trauma Effie and Essie experience, it doesn't just disappear. It continues through their descendants, shaping their choices, the opportunities they have, for generations.
It's almost as if we're supposed to follow those echoes,
Hmm.
to see how the effects of slavery carry on over time, how it shapes each generation.
Exactly. And homegoing doesn't give us easy answers, simple solutions. You see how that first trauma, the one Effie and Essie go through, it shows up differently in each generation. Some, they carry it inside. Others, it drives them to do something about it. We see them struggling to connect with people, trying to find where they belong in a world that keeps telling them they don't.
And speaking of searching for identity, I kept coming back to Ifia's grandson, Quay, sent back to England for school, a world that seems so far from Cape Coast Castle, at least on the surface. But even there, he faces prejudice, just a different kind.
Right, it's more hidden, this racism. Maybe not as obvious, but still a part of everything. Qui's stuck between two worlds, can't fully embrace either one, its fun to heritage, or being raised British.
He even says that with all the discrimination, he actually feels safer in England than back on the Gold Coast. Like, no matter where he goes, he can't escape history.
His own identity is split, just like the world he's living in. And this whole idea of searching for who you are, trying to put the pieces of the past back together, it just keeps going through the generations.
And sometimes that search leads right to a confrontation with slavery's legacy, like with James, Qui's son, when he goes to the Asante land and meets Akasua.
And that's a powerful encounter. Here's James, descended from slave traders, drawn to Akasua's strength, how independent she is, and she refuses to shake his hand. She knows his family's history, the part they played in the slave trade, and she won't forget it.
It's like this powerful statement against that whole system, a refusal to let the past be forgotten or brushed aside. And I love how Gyasi writes James in that moment. He's not a bad guy, but he carries the weight of his family's past.
And you can see that struggle within him, the values he grew up with, pulling against this desire for something different, something more just.
And that's where Isi's descendants become so important to the whole story. Because while Effie's family is wrestling with being connected to the slave trade, Essie's family is living with the brutal consequences. Each generation, they face a new form of oppression, but there's this shared resilience that ties them together.
Absolutely. It's like that strength Issy had on the slave ship. It's passed down through her family, this inheritance of courage, of determination in the face of incredible hardship.
And you can't ignore how trauma repeats itself in their stories. Isi's daughter, Ness, born into slavery, experiences unimaginable cruelty, then finds a bit of happiness with Sam, who's also enslaved. And then he's taken from her in the worst way imaginable.
It's this harsh reminder that under slavery, even the most basic human dignities, freedoms, they're denied. The system is designed to take away their humanity, crush their spirits.
But Ness, like her mother, she refuses to break. She escapes. That journey with Akua, it shows that same tenacity we saw in Isi. Even when she finds some freedom, the past is always there.
And those scars, Gyasi shows us, they get passed down. Ness's son, Kojo, he lives as a free man, but he's never really free from the fear that it could be taken away.
That kind of uncertainty, it must be its own burden to carry, always looking over your shoulder, never truly feeling safe.
And it highlights how, even though slavery ended, true equality, it was still far off for Black Americans.
Wow.
You see this even more clearly with Kojo's son, H. He's born free, but then, after the Civil War, ends up imprisoned in the American South.
It breaks your heart because it shows how easily those systems of oppression just changed form. Even without slavery on the books, Black people were still targeted, taken advantage of, denied basic rights. H, working in that coal mine, it's a terrifying parallel to what his ancestors went through under slavery.
And this brings us to the 20th century, to Willie, H's daughter, in Harlem. We see how those systems, they still have power. Willie's dreams are always being put on hold, her opportunities limited, not just because of her race, but because she's a woman too.
Even with all the progress that had been made, Willie's story is a reminder of how much further society needed to go. But like those before her, she never gives up on hope. She dreams of a better future for her son, for herself, finds joy in music, in love, in her own inner strength. I mean, we've talked a lot about how trauma carries on through generations, right? But Homegoing, it isn't just about suffering. There's this deep sense of resilience, too. Like, it's a testament to how strong people can be.
Yeah, totally. Throughout the book, you see these characters clinging to hope. They find love, they find connection, even when surrounded by unimaginable pain. It reminds you that even in those dark places, the human spirit, it can still shine through.
Thinking about Isi on that slave ship, finding comfort in stories, holding on to hope for her daughter, it's powerful stuff.
It really is. Speaks to how we can find ways to cope, to survive, even when facing the absolute worst. And we see that same strength in other characters, too.
Yeah, like Kojo, building a life for himself and his family, even with that constant fear hanging over him, finding a community, a place to belong, despite all that.
Right. He created this space for himself, his loved ones, in a world that tried to deny him his humanity. That's resilience.
And age all those brutal years in the coal mine. You said it earlier, but it bears repeating. Finding solace in family and faith in that environment, that takes incredible strength.
Absolutely. He refused to let that experience, that cruelty, put out his light. Even in a place designed to strip away his humanity, he held on to it, showed this incredible capacity for forgiveness, for love.
And Willie, too, facing all these disappointments in Harlem. She never completely gives up hope.
She pours everything into her son, Carson, never lets go of that dream of singing. It's like each generation they draw strength from the struggles and victories of the ones who came before. This, this invisible thread of resilience.
And that brings us to Marcus, Willie's grandson, the last descendant we meet in the book. He goes on this journey digging into his family's past. He has this need to understand where he comes from.
Marcus, he represents the culmination of this whole generational journey. He realizes the past isn't something to hide from or ignore, but to explore. His trip to Ghana, it's like this return to his roots, this reckoning with history.
And in Ghana, he meets Marjorie, another descendant, also on a journey of self-discovery. That scene where they're standing on the coast facing the ocean, so powerful.
Right. It's not just the water they're looking at, it's the weight of slavery, the pain, the loss, all tied to that shoreline. They share that experience, this recognition of how the past shapes who they are now.
Like Gyasi's saying, the only way to heal, to truly move forward, is to face these difficult truths head on.
Homegoing, it reminds us that the past doesn't just disappear. It's part of who we are, woven into our very being. It shapes our present, it influences our future.
So what does that mean for us? How do we even begin to grapple with something as massive as the legacy of slavery, something that still has an impact generations later?
I think it starts with understanding, recognizing how that trauma from the past, it still affects our world in the present. Everything from how society is structured to what individuals experience.
It's about hearing those stories, the ones from the people who came before. It's about honoring their strength and learning from their struggles.
And using all that to create a future that's more just, more equal for everyone.
Homegoing is a powerful reminder that stories matter, that the past echoes into the present, and that it's always important to strive for better. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish it. And on that note, we'll leave you to explore Homegoing further on your own. Until next time, keep diving deep.